Good morning. Today's date is December 24, 2022. We're here with Staff Sergeant Jessie Haynes. Jessie Haynes is stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia at the present time. And we, in the background, have a Sherman tank that is owned by the Evansville Wartime Museum. You see the sign next to Jessie there. And what we're going to do is have Jessie, he's usually working with an Abrams and more modern tanks, but there's a lot of similarities. So we're going to have Jessie move to the front of the tank and explain different parts of the tank so people that give tours here at our museum can explain some things about the tank. So Jessie, let's go ahead and tell us some things about this M4 Sherman tank built in 1943.
Yes, so here you have the M4 Alpha 4 Sherman tank.
Oh, there's a World War II Jeep behind him, but we're not going to talk about the Jeep. Jessie, go ahead and start talking about parts of the tank so our tour guides can understand more what they need to tell our visitors.
Okay, so on a tank, you have your track, you have your hull, and you have your turret. It's always separated into three separate categories. Okay, so on a tank, you have your track. That is this portion. That is your driving portion that goes over it. The hull is that's what we call the body of the tank. And then you have your turret, which sits on top of the hull. So on the M4 Alpha 4 Sherman tank, you have a co-driver and a driver. Up here, you see the periscopes, which is known as vision blocks. That hatch here, you have your driver's hatches, your driver's periscopes. That is what they will see out of when these hatches are closed. This on this side is the same as the other side. It is your main driver's side. This would be your primary driver and then your assistant driver, also known as your assistant gunner. Okay, good. Okay, on the Alpha 4 Sherman, on the turret, this portion, you have your gun. This is a 76 millimeter smooth bore cannon. It means that the projectile will go straight out and then hit its target. Behind the gun is called the gun mantle. This piece moves up and down like this. And then below me, you'll have your assistant gunner's most likely 30 caliber machine gun that he would fire from inside the tank. Both. Okay. So as you can see, on this side we have our main driver. He's sitting up right now. And on this side you would have your secondary driver, also known as your assistant gunner. This is a periscope that they would look out of when the hatch was closed, like so. And then you would be able to see right out of here. Same thing on the other side. You would also have his ammunition and belt firing out of his 30 caliber machine gun. Okay, right now I am sitting in the tank commander's station. The tank commander is in charge of all the crew members in this tank. So in this tank we have 5 personnel. We have a driver, an assistant driver or gunner, assistant gunner. And on my left here, we would have the loader. The loader also will operate the radios and he will load the main gun. Now back in World War II, the loader also was a mechanic for the tank. And then directly below me that you can't see is the gunner. Now the gunner would be firing only the main gun.
How does he see?
The gunner would see, if he needed to look up, he could look out of this periscope and there would be sights for this main gun. So he would be seeing out of that.
How can you see as the main man?
As a tank commander, when I am, we call it down hatched, when I have the hatches closed, I would look out of this periscope and then I would be able to see. Okay, right now I'm standing on the back of the Sherman holding the tank commander's 50 caliber machine gun. Back in World War II, they would have either had, the tank commander would have got out of the hatch and stood on the back and been able to fire this weapon, or they would have had maybe an infantry person standing back here and was able to fire this weapon while they were moving. It's very significant that the tank commander has a 50 caliber machine gun because it allows for more suppressive fire. That's where you're being able to put rounds or bullets at whoever is firing at you. And that's, during World War II, that's probably maybe what it would have been done.
So, Jesse, this is a Sherman tank. It weighs 67,000 pounds. You're now in an Abrams. There's been multiple modifications of tanks, multiple tanks before the Abrams, but the Abrams is the most modern tank that the United States has right now, and its weight's 144,000 pounds. Can you tell how it seems different than the tank you're on right now?
Yes, so the main differences in the Abrams, obviously we've had a lot of engine modifications. The turret is set up a lot differently. It's a lot bigger. We've also condensed down from 5 crew members down to 4 crew members. And we have moved the 50 caliber machine gun to the front, so that way the tank commander can shoot it much more easily. And we also have switched, I'm going to move up this way. We've also switched from the open style hatches to a rear hatch. It would open up in the rear. But we've moved from a 76 millimeter cannon to a 120 millimeter cannon. And much more, we have a lot more targeting systems and optics that are much more upgraded from this time era.
And the gun, what's the distance of the shot or the projectile from that gun? 10 miles?
From the 76 millimeter, I would give a rough estimate that it is probably maybe accurately 1,000 yards.
And then what about from the Abrams?
Well, the exact number of how far it shoots is classified, but I can tell you we can shoot accurately up to 4,000 meters. 4,000
meters, okay. Now, the power of that could knock over another tank from the Abrams or knock over a locomotive. Is that strong? Or are you allowed to say that?
Yes, an Abrams is a what we like to call a one-shot, one-kill tank. It can knock out a tank with one shot.
Now this tank, I don't know how fast it would go. I don't think it was real fast.
Speed should have been roughly between 25 and 35 miles an hour.
How fast is your Abrams? Are you allowed to say that?
The top speed is classified, but I can tell you that it goes much faster than 35 miles an hour.
And when we saw in the Iraqi war, they had tanks everywhere, and the Persian Gulf War, and you saw them just moving in a cortege, just tons of them, and there was nothing stopping them.
Yes.
How much gas mileage you get, or is that classified too?
I know that the Abrams has around roughly 400 gallons of fuel, and we suck through it pretty fast.
Do you have extra tanks on the Abrams, or how you got to get gas pretty frequently if you're going on long distance?
So, rough estimate of how far an Abrams goes around, I'd say 200, 250 miles.
Yeah.
And then yes, we have to get gas.
Diesel?
It is, yes.
Okay, whatever you can say. Okay, we're going to talk about the rest of the tank. He's going to get down from here, and we're going to talk about the rest of the tank. Jesse's here in front of the tank, and we're going to talk about the track sections. The fabulous thing about a tank is that it has to distribute its weight, and it distributes its heavy weight of 67,000 pounds with these tracks. If you had tires on this tank, it would sink down and get mired down in mud and soft dirt. So Jesse's going to show us about how he changes on the Abrams, and it's a very similar technique to how you change it on this Sherman tank. So talk about one track there.
Okay, so what we're looking at here is this that I have my hands on right here is called a track section. Now, as you can see, you have 1, 2, 3 individual track sections. Now, how they're connected is what we like to call an end connector. These pieces right here. I'm going to move around so you can get a little better look. This end connector is a piece that connects 2 track sections together. You have one on the outside and also one on the inside. Now, what keeps this end connector tight is something called a wedge bolt. This right here is called the wedge, and then under here is the bolt.
So you undo the bolt, point to where the bolt is. You have a pliers that that releases that bolt, and then you use that sledgehammer to remove the connector. Show us what you do. Show
Okay,
us.
so what we would have done back, if I was on this tank, is, let me move over here,
Yeah.
is I got my two tools. I got what we call a tanker bar and a sledgehammer. Tankers love to have these things. All right, so here we have the wedge. Here we have the in connector with the wedge bolt. I would get a wrench that was already most likely in a tool bag, and then we'd undo this bolt, pull this wedge off. Now this in connector is ready to be hammered off. Now it takes some actual strength, but you would take the crowbar, you'd put it on the in connector, and then you'd have your assistant hit the back of the crowbar until the in connector came all the way off, and then you'd have to do it on both sides, which would release the track, and it would allow it to fall down.
So after it falls down, then this track has fallen down, and tell us then how it falls, the front would fall down, and then tell us what happens after that point.
Okay, so the really cool thing is everybody's like, oh my gosh, this track is so heavy, I can't actually lift it. Well, we were really intelligent back then. When the track falls down, you have this piece hanging, this piece is on the ground. So the driver would start the tank up, and you would use the other side, you would use the tank to pull yourself back. So this would start rotating backwards, and you would just walk the track all the way back until it came all the way off of the tank. And then you would repair whatever you had to repair, and then you would do the exact opposite process in order to get the track back. So most likely, what I would have done is I would have driven the tank back up on it until I had enough pieces here connected to the sprocket, and then use the tank to pull the track all the way back up on, and then you go back and then reconnect it in the rear.
Okay, tell us about that driver, that part right there. Just tell us how important that is.
So I'm jumped ahead on a few things. So on a tank, obviously we have the track. Then what this is called is a sprocket, a drive sprocket. Now the cool thing on a Sherman is that the engine is in the rear, but it drives from the front. So it has a big drive shaft that comes to the front, and
Transmission. Yeah.
we have a big transmission, and then directly behind this, and what we call the housing, can they see that?
Yeah.
This is called the housing. You had a big shaft that connected on both sides. And in the Sherman, I believe they had sticks that would drive the shafts.
Okay, tell us about those wheels between there, and are they similar to railroad wheels? Tell us about those and what they do. Point to what they are.
You have your roller wheels, one here, and your centerpiece. These were very similar to railroad designs. So that's why a lot of Shermans were made next to railroad pieces. On the top, you have your track slider. This big metal piece, big and heavy. It would slide the track if it was to ever get loose and come down, because tracks on tanks do stretch. They become loose. Then back here, you have what you call your idler wheel. The idler wheel is kind of like a tensioner. It keeps the track at a certain level, so that way it doesn't drag or hook up on any of this that tears itself off.
And this keeps it all on the right track, and there's some pressure on these wheels, is there not? Some weight pressure?
Yes, that's what this is for. Distributes even pressure. That's why you have this.
I see. Okay.
Right?
This same type of thing on an Abrams today?
We've developed, we've advanced a little bit in technology. We use stuff called torsion bars, and we also have tensioners that we can actually get outside and put tension back in the track to keep it tight. But This was an amazing design when it came out.
And does the Abrams have a similar type of grousers or these tracks, but just a lot bigger?
We've jumped up to we don't have the flat spots anymore, as this is what I mean flat spots is these wheels only roll in the center. We have dual wheels on an Abram, and we have a little, it looks kind of like this. It's a guide that runs between the two wheels and it keeps the track centered.
Okay.
So another cool thing about the Sherman is, as we were talking earlier, we have your assistant driver here. Well, if you're looking right here, this is the hull that I was talking about. This is, I believe it was 4-inch thick armor. Well, then we have this big piece of added armor, right? That's added armor. They had this here so that way a shot from either a German tank or a Russian tank, it would have taken a lot more to get through and kill the assistant driver, because you need to be able to drive the tank. Now, if we step back a little bit further, we have another one. Why we most likely would have had this one right here is because there was probably an ammo storage here. The easiest way to kill a tank is if you set off the rounds that are inside of the tank, because that's where they store the rounds. So they had extra armor here. And they also have extra armor up here on what we were talking about, the gun mantle. The gun mantle has extra armor because you want to still be able to use the gun. You also want to protect the gunner and the tank commander and the loader. Okay, so here I am on the back of the Sherman tank. One thing you couldn't see when I was standing in the TC's or the tank commander's position is this is where your radio antenna was. There would have been a big long antenna up there, and that's how they communicate. Down below me is what we like is the gas cap. Now, it's got a big pin in it, so we would have pulled the pin out, lift up the gas cap, and then you could have fueled up from there. What my right foot is standing on is the engine hatch. If they needed to do maintenance on the engine or pull the engine out, they would have pulled this hatch up and then pulled out the engine.
Where's the gas tank?
Gas tank is up here.
Okay.
It sits, I'm sorry, can you delete that?
Yeah.
Your right side fuel cell gas cap. Now in a Sherman you had two fuel cells. You had one on the right and one on the left. Here you have the big gas cap, and then you would have had a wrench in order to open the gas cap up, and that's where you fuel up, is inside here. One on this side, and then one on the other side.
Okay.
So you have two.
And show us the air filter, Jessie, too. Not easy to put that thing back, is it?
No, it is not.
Even a hammer or a sledgehammer to help, yeah.
Here you have your intake system. Here you have your intake system. You have your intake grill and then your air cleaner.
Okay.
Most likely they probably would have had modifications then if they were to need to go through rivers or streams. They could have expanded this up, put on a snorkel kit so they could go through deeper water. Here, I'm assuming is your maintenance hatch. This is where you'd have been able to check your engine oil and all that stuff to make sure that your engine was running fine. I am back at the rear of the Sherman tank. Currently the engine we have in here is an 18-liter V8 Ford motor. But what they would have had on it coming from the factory was a Chrysler Alpha 57, or also known as an A57 V8 engine. So on the Sherman, you have the engine in the rear, the transmission is in front of it, and then you have a drive shaft that goes all the way to the front and then would connect to the two front drive sprockets.
This says that most of these tanks were A57. This one has been replaced with a Ford engine, 18-liter Ford V8.
All right, so here I am standing at the rear end of the Sherman tank. Now, if you were to come to this museum and look at this tank, you're gonna see written on the tank, it says lift here. These are what they are called your lifting eyes. This is how they would have lifted it by crane onto a boat. What I have my hand on here is called a tow rope. Now, it is not a rope, it is a big metal wire, but that is what you would use to either tow this tank or use this tank to tow another tank. So, talking about the tow rope, this contraption right here that I'm moving is called a whale tail. That's what we call it now. But this is where you would hook the tow rope in and then hook it up to another tank that also had these equipped. These are equipped both on the front and the rear of the tank. So here I'm standing next to the tow rope. You might be wondering what this piece is. This is your shell casing extractor. The loader, which sits on the left side of the turret, would open this up and then push the expended rounds out of the tank. Looking down this, you're going to see more added armor. That is to protect the main driver, so that way he wouldn't get shot. The Sherman, you might be wondering what this board is for. These are called shoring boards. If the tank was to get stuck in the mud, you would put these boards in whatever direction you were trying to get yourself out of it, whether that was going forward or backwards. You would put these boards under there so it'd get extra traction coming off. This big piece right here is called your front piece, or front plate. This houses all of your gearing and all of your drive mechanisms that would drive the tank. That's why it's very much added armor and protected armor.
What does it feel like when that big 75 millimeter gun is shot?
Yeah, so on the Sherman, whenever you shoot the main gun, that's what we call this, the main gun, outside, it would be one of the loudest things you ever heard in your life, most likely deafening at that time because they didn't have very good hearing protection. So it would have deafened a lot of people. But inside the tank, you actually don't hear much of anything. You just hear the shell casing extracting out of the gun, and it goes for the same on the Abrams today. Outside of the cannon is a very big shockwave and blast radius, but inside you don't hear anything. So talking about the noise of what the gun would have sounded like, what would it sound like when you were driving this? Well, these things were very loud. Back then, as you can tell from what we call a Kevlar, that is more of a headpiece, it wouldn't have protected your ears that much. So it was very loud inside. And most likely a lot of the tankers back then would have been deaf by the end of the war because it was so loud. So back in these days, there was no air conditioning in these tanks, but they were also fighting over in Germany. And if any of you are from Germany or from Europe, you know that in the wintertime it's very cold. So they probably would have made makeshift heaters that they would have used inside the tank to keep themselves warm. But if they didn't have that, then they would very much be cold. During the summertime, it would have been very hot in there. On our modern day tanks, we have upgraded this for the crew. We have a heater for the crew for when it's very cold. We can turn on a heater. And then we also have an air conditioning system, but it is used to cool down our optics because they need to be cooled.